in an AI world, you might have product market fit today, but you might wake up in the morning, you no longer have product market fit. We built a consumer marketplace and got on YC, raised a great Series A, and then ended up selling that business.
Marketplaces are just notoriously hard to build. How did you solve the cold start problem?
That business took probably two and a half years to see any real product market fit. Our first rental of a drone resulted in a theft, right? So like you couldn't get much worse than that.
How far away do you think we're going to be from the first PE fund that makes decisions just purely on AI?
I think about it.
Wow. Why do you think a lot of entrepreneurs fail to reach the success that you and your brother had? Also, you mentioned that you want to become, $1 trillion company. Like, what do you think are the steps to get there?
Well, first of all, Arnie and I, we're not planning to come second. I say to the team regularly, if we have three outcomes, $1 trillion, $100 billion and zero, and you have two choices, everyone better be choosing zero and $1 trillion. And no one's choosing 100 billion. We're not going to be sat there in 20, 30 years time saying, yeah, we made $100 billion company, but we came second. No one wants that.
How do you test when you invest into someone to understand if they will persevere when things will get tough?
Any entrepreneur journey, regardless of scale, it's hard from start to finish, regardless of how successful you are. So you've got to enjoy the journey. But
I mean, you've been an entrepreneur for so many times. Like, do you feel that it kind of gets easier? You hear a lot about the ups and downs and the roller coaster in entrepreneurship. So you would believe that after you do it once or twice, like the highs are less high and the lows less low. Like, how do you see it?
I mean, for me, I feel like the highs are just as high, if not get higher. The lows you become somewhat immune to, right? I think look, at the end of the day, if you've done this, 2 or 3 times, you're not doing it for the money, right? You're doing it, you made the money, you're doing it for the love of the game. And the love of the game is the high moments.
So the first time you decided to become an entrepreneur, do you want to tell me the story behind it? It was like with your brother, no?
Yeah. So look, Arnie, funny enough, Arnie originally got into Cambridge to study law, and then like my older brother, he swapped out to study computer science when we started coding together. So I think we always knew that we wanted to build something, and I think we quite quickly got the bug of the excitement of writing code and building stuff, and that's kind of our journey really started as wanting to be entrepreneurs, right? We were those type of entrepreneurs that set out and we'd already decided that we wanted to build something. We got kind of lucky. I mean, we worked hard, but got lucky. We built a consumer marketplace and got on YC back in kind of 2017, very much in the heyday, and raised a great Series A, and then ended up selling that business. But it was such good fun.
And when you look back, what is about building? Is it that you want to scratch an own itch? What do you think is the intrinsic motivation initially for the first builders? Because I would assume you don't think about how big is the market. You don't think about all the things that maybe you kind of learn later to ask the questions about.
I think you got to be honest with yourself about what you enjoy. I really do believe that being an entrepreneur is a journey, not a destination. It sounds cheesy, but that's really what we believe. And so you got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and do you really are you really enjoying yourself? Because if you're doing it for any other reason, you're motivated by money or those things tend to shine through pretty quick. You've got to enjoy the creativity and the concept of building things. You've got to be curious and resourceful. And that's really what motivated us to do it, right? Is we just got so excited about building things that, that people want at the end of the day. It's there's nothing, whether it's in consumer or it's in B2B, in our view, it's quite similar. If you build something and put it in a user's hand and it makes them smile, that sort of stuff doesn't get old.
So what was the curiosity with Fat Lama, for example?
So I think that really started where it just baffled us. I think that, so Fat Lama for those that don't know, was a marketplace, or is a marketplace, that allows people to rent out their items to other people nearby in a way that they're fully insured. So that's anything from DJ equipment, musical instruments, cameras, drones, gardening equipment, sports equipment, whatever, right? So, there's items that you have that you're not necessarily using every day that, kind of just sit there, but you don't want to sell them. It really didn't make sense to us that there was just so much of this stuff that just kind of hangs around. And so we kind of set out very mission driven to solve that problem. And that's kind of what we did. And we knew that it was layered, right? So another interesting problem kind of within that whole overall problem space is how do you even build a product where you can insure the lenders in that scenario, right? If I'm lending out a £10,000 camera or $10,000 camera to, someone who lives, down the road, how do you build a product to make sure that that person borrowing the item, is going to be a genuine borrower? It's very different to Airbnb, right? Because, Airbnb, you can't steal a house. I mean, you can try, but you can't really steal a house. These things, these are just high value items that you can steal and sell in most cases pretty quickly, by the nature of what they are as items as well, right? And we just wanted to solve that problem.
And marketplaces are just notoriously hard to build. You have the chicken and the egg problem. And also usually you just have to be very niche, so the match rate is kind of high. So let's say on the supply is someone that like to your point, they are DJs, but they can't afford to buy the set. And on the other hand is people that actually, have that stuff. Did you go very niche onto, let's say, a product segment or a customer segment? How did you solve the cold start problem?
Well, first of all, unlike our subsequent two businesses, that business took probably 2.5 years to see any real product market fit, basically for the reasons that you described, right? We had this issue where either items were high value and low use case frequency, or they were low value and high use case frequency, right? And the issue with those two ends of the spectrum in a marketplace is, you're really only making money on your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on transaction. You're not really going to make money on that first transaction. That was really difficult to do. What we, the way that we kind of growth hacked that was we built the supply side first, right? So we really focused on anything that we could to get items listed in a certain location, in a certain category. And then once we had them, we knew that we only had that lender active for a certain period of time. So it was so important that we would get them a rental. For the first rentals, this was just us buying the stuff. And then it was we would get an inquiry on our listing, and we would route that to another lender with a real item, and so on and so on. So it's definitely to start with, it was a bit of brute force, but eventually kind of the flywheel started to get going. But yes, we ended up having to focus really category by category, particularly where the overall unit economics made sense. So for example, where there was high use case frequency with high value, these were our really good, early adopters, because they were things, people musicians and creatives like photographers and so on. They were great because they were using these high value items on a regular basis. So the unit economics, both from a retention perspective and the average order value, tended to make sense in those categories.
And also walk me through, so in an entrepreneur's life, you kind of found the company, you go through the first 1 year or 2 years, hopefully find product market fit or iterate long enough to find product market fit. Then you kind of scale and then you kind of exit. Take me to that room just before you guys sold to Higlo. As an entrepreneur, what was the discussion about? Did you guys say, we don't believe that we can scale this further? Did you get just bored, hey, let's do something else? Do you remember the moment?
Yeah, and two really different stories in some respect, right? Because our second business was much faster. The numbers were so much bigger by way of kind of exit value and how much money everyone was going to make and so on. They were just vastly different. I think with that business, we realized that it wasn't going to be a 5 or a 10-year journey. This was like a 15 and a 20-year journey that really was not going to be sped up in a venture-backed scenario. And that's quite an important detail, right? We realized that money was only going to speed that type of business up so quick. And it was really at that point that we knew, and we could sit down and say, okay, look, we found we've got an acquirer here, they're interested in taking this for 10, 15 years. The price feels fair and right. Does that make sense for ourselves and our shareholders? And it did in that moment of time. But it's tough, right? I think as entrepreneurs, you got to make big, bold decisions quickly and live with kind of no regret. But I think in hindsight, it was that particular decision was a great decision for really everyone at the table.
And how long did it take, until you kind of sold Fat Lama to Higlo, and then for the idea with Model ML to form?
So between Fat Lama, we built a business called Fancy that ended up getting sold to goPuff. That was super lucky. At the end of the day, it was being ran by Arns, my brother. It was a last mile grocery delivery business 4 months pre-COVID, right? I think if you could have started any business at any moment in time, you would have started that business at that moment in that location, right? Unlike Fat Lama, we launched that business, 4 weeks of writing code, and boom, straight line up, instant product market fit, instant pull, referrals got going. It just business was just absolutely flying. And then COVID hit, and it was literally throwing fuel on the fire. This thing went straight line up, live in 15 cities over a 4 or 5 month period. Even looking back on that, think about this is a vertically integrated business, right? So there's 3 apps here. There's a consumer app, there's the ride app, there's the warehouse app. You're buying the goods, you're holding the goods, in a warehouse. To scale that business as quickly as we did operationally, even looking back on it was mind bending. We were out, raising a $100 million round, and then subsequently ended up selling it to goPuff after they raised $1 billion led by SoftBank.
Got it. And when you tackle an idea, I understand that maybe, you and your brother kind of influence each other and you kind of help each other. And how do you go about an idea? When does it form in your head? And then maybe you can take me to the moment where you're hey, let's create Model ML.
Yeah, so Arn stayed on at goPuff and engineering for a few years. I ended up spending a lot of our time. We pulled a bunch of our money together and we were kind of investing, ourselves. And you can see where this goes. This Model ML was kind of born out of this. But during that process, for me personally, I was working on idea after idea. We'd hired a few people to work on the investing side, but I was just working on ideas. And I'd constantly be pitching these things to Arns, right? I was okay, this is it, let's go. And he would be nah. And then, because also I should say, coming out of that sort of process, any M&A process, frankly, regardless of size, it's grueling. You think it's a 3-month period, it's more like a 9-month period, and it's every waking hour, you're sleeping next to your laptop, particularly if there's folks in different time zones, it's grueling. So we really thought hard, and then eventually we were spending time building software to improve our own day-to-day. So basically to improve the way that we were investing ourselves. But we didn't really think, it was weird. I was brainstorming ideas, but also working the software. And then suddenly it kind of came to us where we'd met people through private investing that were hey, this is really good. We want this. And then it was so clear to Arnie and I, this clearly should be a product. And, had a couple of conversations, people wanted it. So this was 2024, and then ended up spinning out and raising about 100 million across a couple of rounds last year. But it was instant pull. It was clear the market wanted something that we'd ultimately built for ourselves. So in that respect, there was no need to debate it. It was so obvious, I think, at the time.
And what were the 2-3 features that you guys kind of start with? And also, I'm a banker and I work on a couple of transactions, and in my head, there's no way that an AI banker will not exist in 2-3 years. There's just like no way. Because if you think about like you just have to prepare all the documentations, you have to connect with several sources, you have to take the financial models, you have to talk about the market, you have to create a whole storyline and the narrative, then you have an investor list, you have to reach out to them. So the whole let's say the sales process is just, like I remember like with one client, it's just like I asked Gemini to do a report about, I don't know, like an insurance brokerage market, and it did in 5 minutes what an analyst did actually in 3-4 days. And this is like with updated numbers and everything. I was like, no, like an AI banker in the next 2-3 years. And also I think like now you have like the biggest wealth transfer in history, where most of the companies don't get sold because you don't have M&A advisors, right? So it's definitely like a huge, but I kind of wonder like what was the first feature where you kind of showed to someone, I was like, oh yes, I definitely want that? Because I would assume that since then you kind of expanded horizontally to kind of...
Yeah, so let me explain that chronologically. So first of all, back in the day, this was like GPT 3.5 time, and we were calling functions with large language models, right? That's what we were doing. Obviously now it's like there's different terminology and like the whole world has evolved, but we just thought that was really cool, right? Like you could take something in natural language, you could give it to a model, and you could put in front of the model a bunch of functions, and you could say call the one that's appropriate, etc. And that was really cool to us, right? Now what that kind of unlocks and where we started was we would receive something via email, an opportunity, any opportunity, and we would want to put together a one-pager based on what we'd received, right? But think it would be the work that you would like actually do as an investor, right? So when you receive an opportunity, even if we take a venture type opportunity, not to invest in a fund or direct, right? One of the first things that you do is you'll go on LinkedIn. You'll be like, do I have any like connections in common with this person, etc. Like real tasks that like humans actually do, right? And so we did all this, and that was pretty much our first kind of use case. What happened quickly was we were like, okay, well, there's so many applications of this. It's not just like, do I have connections in common? It's like, okay, has there been any recent transactions like in this space? What do they look like? And where do I get that data from? Is it from PitchBook? Is it from Crunchbase or S&P Cap IQ, etc.? And so we ended up building this tool that was like a workflow automation tool. So it'd be like, this would happen. When this happens, go and do this. Clearly now these systems are like far more, sophisticated. But back then, this was like insanely novel. We thought this was awesome. And to be honest, it was. And so that's kind of where it started. When we actually looked at the market, we were really focused on like where the alpha was and like where time was actually going. And if you look at the market, we kind of put it into 3 kind of core buckets: asset management, consulting, and banking, in general, so not just in investment banking, right? So and we really quickly saw that a lot of time is going towards what in effect is material creation, we call it, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, really repetitive stuff. So at the beginning, we focused on the more sort of what we call deterministic type workflows, whereby, you would have a 5-page PowerPoint output and you would be producing that output on the companies in your coverage universe, like every like quarter, for example. But quite quickly, as these models have evolved, they can be sort of less and less deterministic, right? So they could actually go away and do the numbers on something, etc. And I can list some pretty incredible use cases, but that's kind of where it started. And now obviously it's like a different world that we're seeing.
Super cool. So I have a client, I work with this private equity firm, and they told me that what they're trying to do right now, because they have like a 250 million euro fund. They're a little bit at late stage, so they're going to write tickets, 30, 50 million euros. So it's like, look, there are only 7 companies that we're going to invest in. And the universe in our geography, it's actually not that big. There are actually just, 100, 200 companies in which we're going to invest. We would like to ideally have a platform that kind of follows all these companies. It's connected with all the sources. And in my head, that's absolutely doable today. That's just absolutely doable today.
Let me like touch on, right? Like where the world has come in our space over the last 6 months, right? 6 months or so, it was great that you could, come into a product like ours or similar, and you could build the first draft of a 50-page PowerPoint output, a model, an IC memo in a Word, whatever. That was great, right? But now what's happened is, I'll try and tie one very similar to the use case that you're describing, is like, what is the work that like actually gets done? Like if we take, an investment banking type use case, right? Everyone has their spreadsheets of companies that they cover, right? In one way or another, right? And they're monitoring those companies across a bunch of sort of qualitative and quantitative metrics, right? The quantitative stuff, let's just say we are looking at take private opportunities, quite easy. You've got like an Excel extension that's pulling facts, error, cap IQ. That's great, right? Then you have the qualitative stuff, and you've got an analyst or associate coming in and updating those things, role X has changed, or this person has left, that sort of stuff, right? And then there'll be these signals and these triggers where, an analyst associate will bring this to the desk of an MD, and they'll say, yeah, that actually is interesting. I've seen this before in my head. Based on these signals, go off and do the numbers, go off and do an LBO, whatever it is, go off and do the downstream modeling work. Come back to me with the work, and then, okay, is the model in the numbers? Great. What's the next phase? You're nodding your head, right? You put together the marketing materials, right? You've got the marketing materials, and boom, that's it. You're going down to sponsor X, and you're pitching, right? Now, at our product, that whole thing is automated, right? So the list, the pulling of the qualitative and quantitative metrics, triggering the LBO. Is the LBO in the money? It is great. I'm going to put together the 20, 30, 40 page take private deck. Boom. I'm sending that whole thing, trigger all of the modeling work that's done and the deck to the MD in his inbox, his or her inbox at 9 a.m. in the morning. That's it. They're ready to go pitch. That is the world that we're in now. This concept of all of that underlying work is a thing of the past. Now, to your point, that means that you theoretically can get a lot more work done. This is past productivity. This is revenue generative stuff, right? Where you can get a lot more done. You've got a lot more ideas coming across your desk, and theoretically, you're kind of doing what humans are good at, building relationships and selling and these sorts of things that, at least for now, AI is not going to do for you.
That's incredible. I think it was like the guy from Altimeter that said he's invested both in Claude and OpenAI, and he said that up until now, let's say when you look at market sizes, you look at software market size, but right now software doesn't eat only from the software market size. It actually eats from jobs to be done, or actually jobs, like analysts. Okay, how many analysts, how many associates can you replace or actually make them more productive, like to your point, and also you can increase speed? I think it's just like fascinating. And I think this is how maybe you can argue that you can build $1 trillion company, right? Because if you don't have this element, I think it's just very hard to argue, because you would just look at the market size as it was in the past. I know that also you mentioned that you want to become, $1 trillion company. Like, what do you think are the steps to get there? So
first of all, let's talk about, the elephant in the room is, how do we feel about verticalized applications versus the labs, OpenAI and Anthropic and the others? Interestingly, in the last week, we've been in the process of working not just with those two. We work with, all of them that are providing the front-end models, and really looking at kind of renegotiating our contracts for the year. And all of these contracts are kind of 8-figure type contracts, right? And I honestly couldn't tell you whether we're going to spend 20 million with X or 20 million with Y, and 0 with one and 0 with the other. I couldn't tell you, right? If you actually just look at our evals over the last 6 months, it's 3 months with one and 3 months with the other, and 3 months with one and 3 months with the other, right? Now, we have the luxury that the second that a newer model is released, we programmatically, no human intervention whatsoever, we're running evals at an agent level. The second that a model is better at doing that particular task, it could be, the main agent doing tool calling, it could be, an agent writing an SQL query, whatever it might be, it can swap that model out automatically, right? And the thing is, if you look at the sector that we work in, can any of our customers afford to have not the best product in the market for a 3-month period? Well, clearly the answer is like no, right? Now I mention that because often when we talk about a $1 trillion opportunity here, people are like, well, where does that sit in the stack, right? And but where is this heading? For now, we talk about productivity. We're going to revenue generative. How far away are we from these types of products being able to predict the performance of companies, private and public, better than humans? Now, clearly, with a human mandate, but how far away are we from that? I'll give you an example.
So you mean like how far away are we until you don't need a human in the loop to make the decision that actually you could invest and this goes automatically? Is that
exactly right? But let's break that down a little bit, right? I think middle market private equity is like in our world the best because they kind of their appetite to explore tools is high. They sit in a very sort of low bar from a regulatory perspective, so they can integrate and plug things in and really, really get the true value from these products, very, very quickly. Many of our middle market private equity clients now have entirely AI generated pages in their IC memo and IC process, right? Now, when I say it's still mandated by the human, so it's still based on what they care about as a firm. To your point, you mentioned that fund, $250 million, they're only going to make 7 investments. There's only these companies in our coverage unit, et cetera, right? So it's still mandated by the fund and what they care about and what they've seen historically, et cetera. But it's still the AI that's offering an opinion. Now, interestingly, what we've noticed is for every quarter that goes by, those pages in that IC meeting are becoming more and more and more important. If I look at Q3 last year, it was like, this is interesting. Yeah, it says the management team is slightly weak in this area because of X, Y, Z. This person's actually gone through 4 jobs in the last 8 years. Move on to the next thing. Now these are becoming more and more and more sophisticated based on real data that you can obviously track and trace. How far away is that world of if you're on the buy side, you're receiving a SIM from an advisor, and boom, before you've even looked at it, you've got your memo exactly with the things that you care about. How far away are we from that? And then how far away are we from that AI sort of decision or indicator, let's call it, being like the most important indication in the room? I think a lot closer than people think.
I just went to New York a couple of months ago, and I met this GP, and it's the first AI native fund. The only way that they make decisions is just they let the AI, they have, I don't know how many sources, like how far away do you think we're going to be from the first PE fund that makes decisions just purely on AI? The humans there will just be, on the relationships, investor relationships, but all the decision making is going to be by AI.
I think about 18 months.
18 months?
Yeah.
Wow. And also I talk with Steve from FT. They led the round. He told me like a bunch of questions that I should ask you. But I think like the first one, and indeed I'm also curious, like how come you guys decided to let them lead the round when, as everyone knows, you chose them over the elite of Silicon Valley?
So this was an interesting one. It's an interesting topic. So first of all, when you have escape velocity and you're going after, and you have product market fit, and you're going after clearly an enormous TAM, you're going to have acute competition. Right? Your only threat is competition, really, right? The way that we think about our business is if you have escape velocity, by the way, I don't use that word lightly. Escape velocity is where, 12 months ago, it was a risk to use model ML. Now it's almost a risk in some cases to not use model ML if you're working with all of the, their peers as an example. Now, I'm not saying that's the case, but I am saying that is what we define escape velocity as, right? So if you have those things, you have product market fit and escape velocity, what is your risk? Your risk is speed, right? Because you in an AI world, you might have product market fit today, but you might wake up in the morning, you no longer have product market fit. So it all comes down to the speed at which you can move. Put bluntly, if you move faster than the competition, you will win, fact, right? So that really played on my mind, particularly as we're coming to this round. It was competitive, the business was moving in the right direction, etc. And as we looked at our stage, right, and what was still going to be possible in the future versus now, I spoke a lot with Steve, and Steve is Steve is a force of nature, and arguably the best, certainly the best fintech investment banker, that's ever existed. And Steve had done a lot of work in the market. Frankly, a lot of people were looking at Steve as like, okay, what is the best tool out there from a verticalized perspective? And I sat with Steve, and he gets it. Steve himself, remember, he's an entrepreneur, right? So he got it. And I think we made the decision on the basis that, we're going to need, every ounce of help we can get, because, Arnie and I, we're not playing to come second. I say to the team regularly, if we have three outcomes, $1 trillion, $100 billion, and zero, and you have two choices, everyone better be choosing 0 and $1 trillion. And no one's choosing 100 billion. We're not going to be sat there in 20, 30 years time saying, yeah, we made $100 billion company, but we came second. No one wants that, right? And I think that really related to, Steve relates to that. And I think he has been incredibly helpful to the business, both in terms of as a customer and also now as a shareholder.
And also like some of the questions, I mean, if you can answer them, like maybe some of them are not yet public, but what's an example of one or two larger clients? Like what's the size, scale today, and at full ramp for some of those larger implementations?
Every time I answer this, I get it wrong based on who we've got permission from. I always now just point the audience in the direction of our website. I think it's like pretty obvious from there. We're live now in production with 8 out of the top 10 European banks, by way of example, 3 out of 4 of the big 4, similar names and numbers now in the US, 3 or 4 of the best banks, both bulge bracket and boutique advisors, some of the most famous tier 1 asset managers, both APAC through to Europe, US, and we're pretty evenly split for now across consulting, asset management, and banking. How that skews over time, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it will skew where the headcount is, which typically will mean that asset management will probably be slightly lighter by way of actual revenue. But that's on the basis that we're a seat-based model or a usage-based model. I think these systems over time may even move towards an outcome-based model, which actually you probably end up making more money from the larger asset managers. In other words, almost pricing on an AUM basis. If I fast forward these systems sort of 18 months out.
Interesting, because I was just about to follow up on how do you think about pricing now, and how do you price it? Like, do you price per seat and then per usage? You combine those? Like, how do you look at it, and how do you think this is going to change?
So yeah, for now we're a seat-based pricing model. We do have a small number of large customers, but on a usage-based pricing model. I think the way the market will evolve is I think it will be seat-based. That will sort of evolve into usage-based, and usage-based eventually may even evolve into outcome-based. If I was to guess, the way that we think about costs as well. To be clear, I think costs. In the last 6-8 weeks, you'd probably rarely hear, Series A, B, C founders talking about the cost of the underlying models, but the thing is, it's just based on what they can do and the volume that they can do it at. The example I used earlier of you've got a list that you're monitoring and it's going off and doing modeling and building materials. That list could be 3,000-4,000 companies, right? So you're suddenly you're building systems that, subject to having the correct infrastructure, are capable of building hundreds, if not thousands, of models and decks, all at the same time. The spend, in terms of the models is clearly going to go up. That naturally means that you'll move probably slightly more towards a usage-based model. And you can see this obviously with what Anthropic and OpenAI and the other vertical players like Legal AI, for example, are doing.
And can you give us a sense on where you stand in terms of ARR?
I can't. What I can say is we raise. I always forget what I should I say. We
can beep it up. Like we can beep it up after.
Yeah, we're gearing up. We're actually in the process of raising again. I think, to be honest, just given how close these raises are, you've seen this in legal AI, etc. You know, we're in the process of raising / announcing again, and you know, companies in the space are raising it at anything from like a 40 times ARR to a 60, 70 plus times ARR. And we fall within that bracket. I think from our perspective, you know, we've you know, barely touched the surface by way of, you know, capital that we've raised. I think we're just very, very focused on, and I think that's where a little bit like the second, third time founder comes in of like, you know, ARR is just vanity metrics. You really got to dial in on the metrics that count, you know, the underlying retention, you know, the activity of the underlying users, what they're using the product for, feature adoption, these sorts of things. You know, when you walk around the office here, I'm in London today or in our New York office, you know, you're not seeing revenue numbers. You're really seeing almost consumer type metrics, which is interesting because obviously our background across the first two companies are both consumer. And in some respects, this is Arnie and I's bread and butter.
Absolutely. And if we change gears and get personal a bit, why do you think a lot of entrepreneurs fail to reach the success that you and your brother had? Where do you think they fail?
Perseverance, I think. You know, Arns and I kind of talk about this a lot. We did a podcast with YC. We mentioned this quite a bit. The way I think about it is if something makes sense, right? Persevere at all costs. It's not blind perseverance, but you should persevere as an entrepreneur. And I think more often than not, you see that's where it starts to crack. Now, this is where it's interesting. I mean, Arnie and I, personally, we've invested in maybe 50, 60, 70 companies over the last few years. And we really think about this deeply, like what are the things that we think are good attributes for entrepreneurs and why? Now, perseverance is one. I think that genuine interest, so curiosity and resourcefulness and being genuine is so important, right? Because you know, the way I explain this to people is that I have two children. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, about to turn 6. So 3-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Congrats.
And you know, I'm seeing my children 3 or 4 hours every Saturday and Sunday afternoon, even when I'm with them. Now I hope they trust that it won't be like this forever, but just given we are in crazy times, they'll forgive me in terms of the way that we work. But even when I'm with them, if you scroll through YouTube on my phone, you know, you're seeing AI and, you know, technology. It's just what we care about and what we are excited by, but it's genuine, right? And I think like entrepreneurs, the ones that tend to win are the ones that are genuinely interested in the mission that they're going after. And I always, even in the interviews now, I probably shouldn't say this because then people will overly prep, but I always ask to go through someone's Instagram or YouTube, what was I see? It's one of my interview questions because I'm trying to understand this point. It's like, do they want to come and work at an AI scale up because it's cool, or are they interested? And there's a big difference. One's sustainable and one's not. And then perseverance. I think if it's you got to enjoy the journey, but it is a journey. It's not A to B.
Do you have some examples of perseverance from your own journey? And also, how do you test when you invest into someone to understand if they will persevere when things will get tough?
So I definitely think it's important I mean, the example I've got is, you know, Fat Lama's first rental of our first business. Bear in mind, it was a business, and the whole idea was we were going to be able to insure items that were lent out. Our first rental of a drone resulted in a theft, right? So like you know, it's like you couldn't get much worse than that. And so, but it still made sense to us, and we still knew, logically speaking, it's not blind to experience, we would be able to write technology to sort out that problem. Now, you know, how do you look for that? I really think it's like, where is this person curious? So people should and have passions and things that they care about outside of work, but how much do they care about the topic that they're working on versus, you know, basically just thinking it's cool or they'd fallen into it, etc. And you really have to like pull that out of people, you know, and you can see it, right? Like you get onto a topic with someone and boom, they're a different person. You know, they're you know, I remember in an interview that I did last week, I was really trying to, you know, is this person actually, interested in artificial intelligence? Frankly, if you're interested in artificial intelligence and you've not used Claude Code or Codex or Lovable, etc., and built your own things, you are fundamentally just not telling the truth, whether that's to me or to yourself, right? And when this person started talking about what they built, you know, beyond vibe coding, and they weren't an engineer, you know, by trade, boom, they were just like the excitement, and you could tell that they were just, it was about the concept of building in the AI era that really excited them. And that for me was like, it's 100% yes, right? Because you could see the passion, you know, it's obvious.
Interesting. Like you just have to break through the sales pitch, you know, and just get to know like how interested they are into something. Like I've heard this that really stuck with me is like if you can explain to someone the problem very, very well, they will think that you have the solution as well.
Yeah.
But to explain a problem very, very well, that means you've looked into it from, you know, different angles and you understand it very, very well.
Yeah. But you got to be curious, right? Because like it's these people that are like naturally want to lift up, you know, the bonnet a little bit more and understand just a little bit more. They're the people that deeply understand these problems. To your point though, it's definitely more anecdotally, it's easier to do this in Europe versus the US. I think in the US, just because everyone is, you know, so good at selling, I find it so much more difficult to unpack, like, you know, where is the actual truth here? Like, where is the reality?
Right.
I find it more difficult.
You're just excited about.
Maybe that's why, if we take the Nordics as an example, because they're like in the extreme case. I mean, like, you know, if you're from Stockholm, you're saying how it is, right? And it's, you know, maybe that's why in this era, you know, the likes of Max and Anton are doing so well, because, you know, it's just no one's messing around.
Absolutely. And what's a book that had an outsized impact on you? It can be any type of genre.
I definitely remember reading the hard things that I was younger. There's that chapter where it talks about like on repeat, like this is hard, this is hard, this is hard. I think that no one can prepare anyone for any entrepreneur journey, regardless of scale. It is hard. It's hard from start to finish, regardless of how successful you are. In fact, I think it's almost inversely correlated. The faster you go out, the harder it becomes, because you're trying to keep up, you know, learning as an entrepreneur. No one can prepare you for how hard it is, right? So you've got to enjoy the journey. But equally, there is nothing, at least in Arnie and I's eyes, that is more rewarding than building something and putting it in someone's hands and them smiling and loving it, enjoying it, and bringing delight to their lives, right? Like if you actually just look, and that, by the way, that concept isn't just applied to being an entrepreneur, it's applied to really anything, I think, in life. And so, you know, our view is once you've got it in your mind as like, I might be an entrepreneur one day, or I'm going to go and build something, it's very difficult to like reverse that. You know, we often say it's just a matter of time when we meet people. You know, it's like particularly people that are working at corporates, you know, banks. We deal a lot of people in the finance world at the moment. When I speak to people that are considering a more entrepreneurial journey, it's just a matter of time.
Just a matter of time. And the last question: if you could put a billboard outside of every founder's co-working space, what would it say?
Move faster and work harder.
Move faster and work harder.
There's one just here at the end of our office. I think that, you know, there's very few things at a startup that you can control. I really believe that. But you definitely can control how quickly you move, and you definitely can control how hard you work. So you better move faster and outwork your competitors. Absolutely.
Chaz, thank you so much for taking the time. Congrats for everything that you and your brother have achieved so far. I wish you all the best, you know, in the next 12 months and with the new fundraise, and fingers crossed, you know, to get to 1 trillion.
Let's go get it. Thanks a lot.
Let's go get it. Thank you.